We have here today Marcus, and we're about to discuss Jericho, his new release. Tell us about where you're going with Jericho.
Um, well, I talked to Nick a while back about what direction I should go with my next book, and we discussed maybe merging the horror side with Raventail and the Western side with the DSP, and sort of see if I could come together with the horror Western, which is what I did with Jericho. I really was interested in sort of the Western kind of the towns in the West, in the Old West, where they seem to be sort of bastions of sanity in a really rough and tumble world. And so Jericho is kind of like my take on what I think would be a very scary Western story set in a pretty brutal time. Yeah.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, getting into the whole concept of weird westerns, what stuck out to you as a fun way to write these?
I think for me, I like to write characters that actually have a little bit. So I like the supernatural element of a horror of a western and a west in a horror. And a lot of horrors, you can go a lot of different ways. You know, you can have psychological horrors where it's just a really bad guy who just is crazy and he does horrible things, like with Scream and some of these other movies. And then I kind of leaned a little bit more towards the supernatural element. So my bad guys are sort of like Lovecraftian horrors that you can't really understand. I like the idea of evil being something that is so abstractly wild that you can't really personalize it. It just freaks you out. It's just otherly. And so I have to give the guy or the main character or the protagonist a little bit of an edge. But I always want to try to put a barrier on him so he doesn't just have a MacGuffin where he can just go in and have magical powers that can just destroy everything. So there's like limits to what he can and can't do.
If he gets the
Um,
magic crystal, he sends him back to hell. Yeah.
ex- exactly. So you can't really have that. And there's got to be sort of a unique way for him to win, or if the story goes the other way, for what happens if he loses. But um, for me, I just think that kind of limiting factor with the protagonist is interesting, and giving the protagonist some sort of supernatural power himself to fight against the evil, I think is fun, and I really like doing that. And but I like to do it with limits.
So is this
Right.
like more on focusing as a antagonistic sort of thing, or is there an anti-protagonist in there or
Well,
antagonist?
so the main character Eli Knox, he's an ex captain in the army, and you know at that time in American history, you know there was a lot of stuff going on with the American Indian Wars, and so there's a lot of area of gray activity that we were engaged in, I think. And you know, and you look back on it, it's like, man, that was a brutal time for a lot of people. And he did some things in his past while he was a captain that he wasn't proud of. Now he lost his wife and daughter during the American Indian Wars to the natives. They I didn't want to get too deep in it, but he had a revenge plot in mind, and so he went out and he did a bunch of stuff in the vein of getting revenge on those he thought had hurt him and killed his family. But at one point, he kind of realized that what he was doing was wrong, and so he wanted to rectify that. So he went to the people that he had wronged, and they promised him, you know, they would forgive him, but he had to, you know, earn it. And so they kind of cursed him with power, and that's sort of the magical power he has, that he has to go around and sort of try to balance some of the evil that's going on in the West and in that time. And so in that sense, he's sort of an anti-hero where he's not really a good guy. And that's why they kind of picked him, because they needed someone that was willing to do what was needed to be done in these situations. And so in that sense, he's got a dark side, and he's willing to do what he has to in order to kind of come out of whatever he gets into alive.
But he's on some sort of a basic redemption arc type thing to make up for the bad
Mhm.
things he's done before as well.
Right. So he's got that sort of sense of, okay, you know, I know that I have a better purpose. I'm trying to do something better, but I'm kind of obligated to this. But at the same time, you know, when it hits the fan, he's ready to do what he needs to do, regardless of who he has to get out of the way to make it happen. So I find the more I write, the more gritty I kind of like my heroes to be. And when I early books I wrote, they were more, I don't know, they were more innocent or perfect. And so as I kind of delved into how to write different things and grab the audience so that they were interested in the characters, I've found that the more interesting the character, the more flawed, the more sort of human they are, then the more people, kind of attach to them and they get interested. And that's when they just can't put the book down. At least that's what I've heard. So,
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's like a realistic type of thing.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the more flawed a character is, well, it's the more fun they are to write too.
Yeah.
Because it's like, vanilla, super perfect kind of people, stuff like that, don't make the most interesting stories.
I kind of liken it back to sort of like the comic books. Superman's
Mhm.
almost perfect. He's got all the power in the world. And it's really hard actually to write a story that puts him in any jeopardy. And if you notice, most people, they really side with Batman. He's dark, he's gritty, he's human, he's flawed, he has no powers, but he gets the job done.
But he's
So,
got money.
yeah, that helps. That's his
Yeah,
superpower,
true.
I guess, right? But, I think people that when you read a book, at least for me, it's so much more personal than say watching a movie, because as you read it, it's in your head. You can fill in a lot of the gaps. There's not a visual display that you can just see what the producer, what the writer, what the people wanted to have explained. You kind of write with a lot of margin open for the reader to interpret on their own, which inadvertently makes it personal to them. And if you do it right, you can let them fill in some of the gaps and then they connect with the story. And if you make the characters more relatable, then they connect with that character more. And so I like having that flawed aspect of the main character.
Absolutely. Always a better thing that way.
Yeah.
So do you think how long this book is gonna like how many parts of the book are you gonna be?
I've already got a second book plotted out, and I like to leave my books usually open. Like I finish the story in the book, so I don't leave it on a cliffhanger where you like have to wait for the next book to find out what happens. I
Mhm.
wrap up the story, so when you finish it, if you like the book but you're not necessarily interested in another one, you at least feel satisfied. But I also leave it to where the next book can pick up and I can start the next series in the series, so that you feel like it's a continuous story with the same character. So I could easily see this book going 4 or 5 different stories. I don't ever really have an end plot for the end of it because I like to keep it open for series. And if the series is successful, I want to keep giving the readers what they want. And if they keep buying it and they like it, then that works for me too, because then they're buying it, we're making a little money, and they're enjoying it. And so to me, that's chef's kiss. I love that. So I try to keep it open.
So
Absolutely.
it's
Always best thing.
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
kind of like when you in your book, there's like parts of some of the readers that want to know how did it get to that, and you would add some of those things that in the first book to the second book where oh it makes sense from the first book. There's like some
Yeah.
parts of it like that.
Yeah. I actually, I really like introducing, say, a character in one book. There's a lot of characters in the book, and then one or two of them will find a way to connect into the second one. So in doing that, and in the second one, you meet new characters, and then that somebody in that second one kind of filters over to the third one. And then as you get maybe in the third or fourth, you can bring some of the I did that with another series. It's The Ways of the Warlock. It was another series I wrote, but it was more of an urban fantasy. But I did there's a 6 book series, and throughout it, I kind of connected these characters throughout the story so that you still felt familiar with the second one if you read the first one. And then you felt the family of the story growing. So there's all these different characters to pull from. And then what I really like to do is I like to, near the end, if I do it, like in that one, I actually did had sort of a final battle at the end of that series. I bring a lot of those connections in. So you almost have like a mini army. And in this book, I kind of created a posse, which I really, when I first started writing the ways or the Jericho, the horror Western, I wanted to build some elements in from the experience of the Westerns that I've watched and read, of this, some of those, just those cliches that I really love, like building a posse, riding off into the sunset, the old West town of sort of lawlessness, and maybe just a couple people in the law enforcement that are holding the whole thing together. There's just this elements that I have loved with the Westerns that I wanted to bring into it. And going forward, I like to bring those characters through each book so that as the main character grows and develops, those other characters grow and develop. So it provides an opportunity for readers to connect with a lot of different characters. So if they may not, I've had people say they like another character more than the main character, and that character is what kept them in the story. I'm like, that's awesome. That's great. You provide them more characters and they find different things that they like. So it's like a buffet. So just
And you
give,
can have spin-offs coming from that too. If people really get attached to a secondary character, they become a new main character for a whole different series. And
yeah,
then
Oh
you're
yeah,
writing
it's
all
gonna
the
be
time.
they're gonna be
yeah.
a if there's gonna be like a fan base of that certain character, they're gonna be writing like a fan fiction.
Yeah, and that would be my ultimate. I think as a writer, having someone what two things. One thing I love is when I talk to someone who's read the book or one of my stories, and they tell me something in it that they found that I may not have necessarily intended, or I did intend and they found it. And to me, that's just amazing. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, you caught that. I did that, hoping someone could kind of find out. And the other thing would be to where people enjoy it so much that it inspires them to maybe write something of their own, and then they put my characters in it. And to me, that's just it's the best compliment I think you could get.
Yeah, it's either that they make it different with different stories with like some of your characters, or they put self-insert.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, fanfic the heck out of things. Gotta love that.
Yeah.
So are you generally a big plotter when it comes to writing books? Do you figure it all out ahead of time, or
um,
do you go organically, seat of the pants stuff here?
I I think it's been an evolution over the course of my writing career. I think I started writing in 2012, and initially I was just a pantser, I guess they would call it. I just had an idea of maybe a scene that I wanted or what the ending would look like. And then I cobbled it together throughout, which was really for me interesting initially because I felt like the story could go wherever it wanted. Um, and then over time, I really wanted to integrate character development and plot details in a more complex way because I like to try to write sort of hidden either ideas or good foreshadowing or little treasures throughout the story so that when you get done reading it you can look back and say, oh, this thing that happened to allow this guy to beat the bad guy was set in motion in chapter 2. And if I was paying attention, I could have kind of guessed that, right? I like that idea. So in order to do that, over time, I had to become more plotted. I had to plot more things out. And so I would say it's more of a mixture of big plot points that I really wanted to make sure that I incorporate, but how I get from one point to the next is more just seat of my pants, let it flow, and then see what happens.
So do you have characters come along and tell you you're writing it wrong?
Uh, you mean like the ones that I've written?
Yes.
Uh, no, but they do come along and tell me that there's an opportunity here to go a slightly different way. So there's a group in the Jericho. There's three brothers, and they are bounty hunters. It's the McClintock Three, and they're pretty well known. They're kind of infamous because they're really good, and they really don't care about who they go after. They just kind of are focused on keeping some sort of order and taking the job and seeing it through to the end. Um, and when I first started with them, what I had in mind for them was sort of not how it played out because when they got introduced in the story, I realized that their opportunity and what they could become was different than what I had initially done. So, in the sense that you're asking, yes, I have had characters that have taught me that hey, I'm not writing this correctly and I need to fix it. And luckily what's good about it is I like to think I'm quick on my feet. I don't have a lot of huge rewrites after I get done. I tend to like really focus throughout the story so that by the time I get done the cohesive whole is good. And so that saves me from having, at least it's good to me and I feel like it's solid, so I don't feel like I have screwed up this whole part that I have to go back and then refigure to make it work because I've been methodical about that throughout the story.
So we're looking at Jericho. Things that happen in book one are going to have something come of them in book five.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to give it all away, but
Well, no, but just leaving the breadcrumbs.
yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I love connecting those stories. Even though and what I like to do is each story is an independent story on its own. But throughout that, I thread connections so that it's all tied together by the end.
Yeah, I guess by the conclusion of a series, if it ever really concludes, you get the big bad that has been kind of like there in the background the whole time you never know about.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes everybody that he's interacted with or made connections and relationships with to kind of come together
Hmm.
and go after. Because I really like that idea of building a unifying force. It's sort of like the ultimate idea of good versus evil, where, you know, people stand together and they can defeat things far greater than they could alone. And having that clear sort of understanding of this is what we need to unify for, I think is a powerful message. So I like putting that in there.
Absolutely.
If Jericho does conclude, like it's ended, let's say you're planning to make a new book with the same concept, are you thinking about putting some of those characters from Jericho to the other books?
Um, I don't know. I think Jericho is a very sort of specific book. So with the urban fantasy books I've done with the Ways of the Warlock series, those are a little bit, I suppose, easier because it takes place in the modern world, and so I could kind of branch that out into a lot of different areas. Um, in Jericho, it's sort of a unique Western world, and since it's my first one, it's really something that I'm kind of not used to necessarily. I hope I did a good job, and I do know with the Western element, there's some things in there that you want to make sure you kind of get right, or at least that you get the essence of it, because there's people that really love Westerns, and that's a timepiece sort of story, and you got to be careful that you don't write in things that aren't accurate at the time. Like I wouldn't put in a car in horse and buggy time, or phrases or stuff. So I did some research on that. But anyway, the point is that it's sort of unique. So if I ever did, or when I write another story similar to Jericho, I like to take the main character that I've created, Eli Knox, and keep him going into the next one. So it's not necessarily another story disconnected from the one I wrote that has some elements. It's following this one main character's journey to redemption through different stories that he brings characters he's interacted with into the next one. I think for me, I get comfortable with the main character and I like to flush him out or her out throughout
Mhm.
multiple books. So when I do write another one, it'll be like that.
Although you could have his overall dual revolvers show up somewhere in the modern times and end up taking out the bad guy at the end.
That is not a bad idea, actually. That is an excellent idea, kind of connecting that to, and then maybe it would be in an antique store and
Yeah,
someone finds them, and then all of a sudden, boom, and now you've connected
strangely
the flow.
cursed, and yeah.
You don't mind if I steal that, do you?
Oh, please do.
Okay. That's a good idea.
Yeah, it sounds like it would actually make a fun little thing going for connect all the books together, get all the fans to cross over on everything.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I've actually written a short story that is about these thieves that steal this book from an antique store, and the book actually, it has been entrapped this dark entity, and they let it loose. But the idea of somebody going to an antique store, finding those revolvers, either stealing them on accident or buying them or whatever, and then realizing, hey, these things are actually cursed, and now I have to fight evil. I
It's
think that's
Friday the
great.
13th,
I
the
love
series all
it.
over again. Yes.
That's right.
So what do we have coming up in book two that you might be able to tell us or not tell us about?
Well, if you've read, Lady, there's a character, Lady Sansa, who owns sort of a dancing establishment in town, and I will just say that her journey changes throughout the story. I don't want to give anything away because what happens is pretty integral to the plot and everything. If you want to know, you got to go read it. But I do think that having some familiar faces in the next book is going to be important, and that character is going to probably translate over to the second book, and you're going to see a little bit more of her development as a character, and also delving into Eli Knox's past, because I don't like to do info dumps. Early on, I sort of did it. I'd have this sort of intelligence MacGuffin character, or this intellect that would just dump information, and it worked in certain instances, and I had to find real unique ways to do it because it's I found that slowly revealing the information through plot elements is far more effective, and I think the reader appreciates it more because they're intelligent and they want to be guided along and not just dumped on.
Right.
So I think exploring his past that I didn't get too deep into, you get a baseline idea of what his sort of journey is about, but I don't get deep into it. And I think exploring that further and learning more about what he did, what he's going through, what he agreed to, and the power that he actually has will help as he kind of works on completing that task. And then at the end, how it all plays out will provide hopefully a nice balance for the reader of his compelling journey and how the journey ends. And I like that. I like looking out on a calm sea at the end of the story, and everything's kind of relaxed and balanced out.
We've had you stressed out for the last 28 chapters. Time to
Yes,
like relax for a little bit. Yeah.
yes, yes. Here's my gift to you. You can breathe now.
Sounds like a very fun book to read, actually.
Yeah, I hope
Intrigued to
so.
go pick one up. Yes.
Yeah, I hope so. I tend to sort of envision the books as chapters of. It's really interesting, at least for me. I find that when I'm stuck on a chapter or an idea, if I go for a drive and listen to metal music, I will have visions of almost like a rock video in my head of a sequence in the book that I'm trying to work out. And I'll be like, oh, that's how I can do it. And then I go back and I write it, and it's just awesome. And I'm like, I have these amazing action sequences, or I like to try to think I do. I enjoy writing them, and so I like to do that. And all of that is to say that when you're reading the book, it's a roller coaster. I like plot development, character development, but in that I try to develop a plot and characters throughout action and adventure, so that when it's almost like watching a movie as you're reading it, and each chapter builds to the next, so that when you get to the end of the chapter, you're almost like, oh, I got to see what happens next. And it's that sort of up and down, so that when you get to the end, you are like being able to go, whew, that's over. Thank God. But it was fun. It was a good ride.
Oh, nothing better than to have people actually cry when a secondary character gets killed off or something like that.
Yes.
If they have like a favorite character and then you kill them, they're gonna be writing a fan fiction about that. I was like, oh, this is what I want. This is what I wanted to end up with, like some things like that.
I like to do something like that sort of sometimes in the right at the beginning of the book. So what it does, one, is it grabs your attention and it makes you realize that nobody is off limits.
Hmm.
So and even though you're writing, you may think in your mind as you write, this isn't the most important character. The effect that has on a reader is like, oh, nobody's safe because I was invested in this character. They spent time building this character. I want to know what's going to happen, and now they're dead. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I like that. So
Yeah, like they develop some sort of attachment to the character, and then all of a sudden they did.
you can't let the readers be comfortable. You have to
Mm-hmm.
keep them on their toes. At least that's the way I feel about it.
So when are we looking at the next one coming out? Jericho's just coming out right now.
My writing has been difficult just because of the situation. I've had different personal things going on. That one actually almost took me a year, but I'm hoping to cut this one down, maybe get it done in about 6 months or so. Now that I've got the idea of what I need to do, writing it is a little bit easier. I've got a little bit more time to write. It's really tough when you haven't made the bestseller New York Times list yet, and you still have to kind of have a full time job, and you're raising a daughter. It's kind of tough to fit time in to write. And thankfully, Nick and everybody at DSP has been very patient and kind. I explained to them very early, like, listen, I will write, and I love writing. I will continue to write, but sometimes I'm not able to put out a book as fast as I want, just because life is tough, and
Indeed.
so they've given me a lot of freedom with that. So I don't have an exact date, but I will get one done as soon as I can.
Looking forward to that, absolutely. I'm finding it curious. I'm looking at the Jericho cover over on my computer monitor over there, and if you tilt your head down and put a black hat on, you basically look like the guy.
Yeah,
Did not.
that was That was not intentional,
That
by the
was
way.
not intentional.
No,
Now
I
I'm
never told the
wondering.
cover artist to put a beard on the guy. They just did it. Not at all. I'll take it though. I like Eli. He's a great character. So I'll take it. But, it's funny. I've had people that read it and I show them the cover. They look at it and go, "That's exactly what I thought he would look like." I was like, "Okay, great. Well, that's perfect."
And he looks like you.
Yeah,
All
completely
good things coming
unintentional.
together.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I also wrote, just to throw it out there, Dimension of Death, Terror at Lake Springbow. It's a
Right.
duology for Raventail. And I really like that one because that was my first horror um, kind of, those are my first horror books to write. And so it gave me a lot of experience or at least feel insight into how to create that horror feel because when I read a horror book, I almost want to feel like the whole time there's this ominous sort of creepy feeling to it that just permeates the entire story. And it's hard to explain, but the way that you craft the narrative and the interactions and the atmosphere can just create this sort of cloud over the story that weighs down on the reader, which I like in the horror genre because it always kind of keeps people not sure what's going to happen. And I think people that enjoy horror like to be afraid. I mean, they like that element of it.
I was going to say same thing in a Western. The actual nature surrounding whatever is going on is usually as big a character as anybody that's riding a horse on it.
Yeah, and that sort of climate and the elements and where they're at is absolutely as important to make people feel like they're out in that hot desert, dry, sort of gritty world. And so writing those two books gave me a lot of insight in how to put that into Jericho. It gave me a lot of experience. So hopefully that was out there. I just wanted to throw that out there that there's
Oh
other
yeah.
two other books.
Keeping a solid mood going to the entire thing.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a great
I
way to
had I
make a
had
book.
somebody that read it was telling me that they felt creeped out the whole time, and I was like, good.
I
I
did
get
it.
excited. I was like, yay! I get excited about that. Maybe that's just something wrong about me, but I'm laughing and enjoying it when they tell me that they were freaked out and they hate spiders and they couldn't sleep. I had one person tell me they had nightmares. I was like, yes,
I did it.
yes. Whatever that says about me, I guess.
Says you're accomplishing doing what you're setting out to do. That's a good thing.
I hope so.
Yeah, they probably gonna be saying, "What kind of person read these? It's
Yeah,
so weird." They're gonna be
yeah. I've
thinking that.
I've heard that. They're like, they said you're a little bit more twisted than I thought you were. I said, well, I got 5 stars out of it.
Yep. Always
Oh
makes a better
yeah.
book afterwards.
Yeah.
Creep you out and make you go buy more Marcus
I
Abshire books
mean,
up on Amazon. Yes.
that's what actually the most interesting is. The weirder it is, the more you read it, and the more you want to find out more, the more you don't want to put down the book.
I think that goes back to earlier where it's a personal story inside your mind. And we think about things far more creepy and weird than we would ever say. And the thing that go through our head, you don't want to be inside somebody else's head because you're like, oh my gosh, this person's crazy. So when you write a book that entails a lot of these crazy ideas, people kind of say, oh, well, maybe I'm not as crazy as I thought I was because this is a great book. I don't know. I just think that when we read something, it can be far more outlandish than maybe what we put in a movie. And the more outlandish, the
Yeah.
more people go, I haven't heard that before because you also want to be unique. You want to find something a little bit different, put your own little spin on things. So if you can write something that's really weird, different, and odd, people are like, wow, that's a different flavor I haven't tasted before and I kind of like it. Let me see what else they've got. So
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think it's great.
When people are reading, it's a completely different. They're using their own imagination to interpret your words as opposed to a movie where you're
Hmm.
dealing with the director showing you what they think it should be
Yeah.
and such like that. And
Hmm.
it can be a lot more terrifying.
The nightmares in our own head are worse than maybe what we can put out there.
We're twisted enough people, we can come up with some creepy stuff.
That's right.
Hmm. Like while I read, there's like always an image following it. Like it's like there's like a movie, and then the subtitles and stuff is the book.
And it's
The
always worse in your head because
Oh
you're
yes,
always
yes.
crazier than you think you are.
Yeah,
Well,
so
Marcus,
we're
we
gonna do
appreciate
the
you coming and joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So do you have something like a piece that you want to share or announce to everybody?
Me?
Hmm.
Yeah, I got a new release, Jericho. It's a horror western. It just came out. I think there's, I've got 10 ratings so far, 5 out of 5 stars. I'm working on another one. If you enjoy that one, I'm going to be writing another one in that series. I've got the Dimension of Death duology. It's a completed story, and it's the story of two teenage girls who have to fight a creature from another dimension. And it's sort of like a lake horror because they wanted, at the time, they wanted a story that kind of centered around water. So the story takes place at a small town on a lake on 4th of July weekend. So we've got that sort of holiday atmosphere going on, which I really like. And then there's the Ways of the Warlock series, which is a 6-book series about Jacoby Shaw, who's an ex-warlock who, has a bunch of horrible things he did in the past. He's trying to do better. He's operating this bar, and obviously the things that he did come back to haunt him because he was a horrible person. So, and that one kind of is a little bit more, you're just your normal urban fantasy, takes place in modern times, bunch of magic, bunch of wizards, monsters, all kinds of stuff. I really like that one. But Jericho, I think, is different, unique, and it's really grabs everyone that reads it. I think if you read it, you're going to really love it. And the biggest thing that I've heard from the readers that give me feedback is that they have been staying up late because they wanted to keep reading it. And that, I think, if you start a book like that, that's what you want. And I think that hopefully that is what will be out there if people decide to give my book a chance, open it up and read it. You're going to get grabbed, hopefully, and it's going to keep you there until the very end.
Very beautiful thing.
Should grab Netflix to do it.
Yeah.
That would be the ultimate. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the next step.
It'll be like
Just as
action.
long as I get to sit on the set and watch it all happen. I don't even care if they chop it all up necessarily, but just to see sort of how it gets done. I mean, that would be probably, I could just die happy at that point, honestly. Because that, if someone had to ask me what would in your publishing and writing career, what would be the ultimate sort of I can now die happy, and it would be being able to be on set while a company makes one of my books into a movie. And to me, that would just be it for me personally.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see.
Hopefully it'll be coming.
See.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you like horror, if you like Western, check out Jericho. The first of many, hopefully.